Behind that unmoving face, I can tell you exactly what I was thinking. I was thinking about a locker. That is where it starts. Not with a general's order. Not with a state occasion. Not with any of the things people imagine when they picture the walls of Aldenmere. It starts with a refurbishment crew, a duty room that hadn't been properly cleared in 11 years, and a wall of old metal lockers being pulled from the stone to make way for new fittings. It starts with one of the crew, a young man with a pry bar, calling out that there was something wedged in the gap behind the last unit in the row. I was the duty guardsman. It was my job to deal with it. What he handed me was an envelope, cream-colored, the kind the household used for correspondence before everything went to internal mail. Sealed, undamaged, because the stone behind that locker was dry and cold and had kept it as clean as the day it was placed there. The postmark was 6 years old. The address on the front was not a posting address. It was a name, Guardsman First Class Renly Oaks. I knew that name. I knew it the way every man who had served in this household for more than a decade knew it. From the old casualty board in the South Corridor, the one that listed the households fallen going back 140 years. Renly Oaks had been posted to a forward liaison detachment. He had not come home. His name had been on that board when I first walked its corridor as a new corporal. I had read it. You read all of them, when you are new, because the men who built this place with their discipline deserve to be read. I turned the envelope over in my gloved hands. It was addressed to him, but Renly Oaks had been dead for 8 years. The letter was 6 years old. Someone had written to him 2 years after his death, and the letter had never been delivered. It had been placed, deliberately or carelessly, I did not yet know which, in the gap behind a locker in the duty room and left there. I did not open it. It was not mine to open. What I did was set it on the duty desk, finish my shift, change out of my tunic, and go and look at the casualty board. Renly Oaks's name was not there. I stood in that corridor for a long time. I had passed it twice a week for 19 years. I knew every name on it the way a man knows the shape of a room he has lived in. Oaks had been there. I was certain of it. I could place him. 4th panel, 3rd column, 12 names from the top. I could see the engraved letters in my mind as clearly as if I were reading them. The panel was unbroken. His name simply was not there. I am a man trained to hold my face still. It is the first and most permanent thing this post demands of you. I held it then, in an empty corridor, with no one watching, because stillness is not a performance. It is a habit of the bones. But something moved inside me that I will not dress up with elaborate language. It was a cold and particular kind of anger, the kind that does not flare, the kind that settles. I went to find Sergeant Hollowell. Hollowell had been at Aldenmere for 26 years. If anyone knew the administrative history of the casualty board, it was him. I found him in the equipment bay and asked the question plainly. I said that I remembered a name on the South Corridor board that was no longer there, and I wanted to understand why. He looked at me for a moment before he answered. That pause told me something before the words did. He said that 6 years ago, the household's administrative office had undertaken a review of the casualty record, that during that review, a dispute had arisen over a pension allocation. He said the name in question, he did not use the name. I had not used it either, had been the subject of a contested claim by the family. He said there had been an administrative ruling, he said. The name had been removed from the board pending resolution of the dispute. I asked whether the dispute had been resolved. He said he did not know. I thanked him and walked back to the South Corridor. I stood in front of that 4th panel again and read the gap where 12 names from the top should have been a man's name, and I understood what had happened. Renly Oaks had died in service. His family had pursued the pension allocation that was owed to them. An administrative office had disputed the claim, and rather than resolve it, someone had taken the path that cost nothing. They had quietly pulled his name from the record. No announcement, no ceremony, no formal removal. Just a panel re-engraved, a name gone, and a family left standing at the edge of something they could not prove. The letter behind the locker was not addressed to a living man. It was addressed to a name that, as far as the household's official record was concerned, had been unmade. I went back to the duty desk and I sat with the envelope for a long time. It was not addressed to me. I had no authority to open it, and I did not. What I did have was a name on the front, a 6-year-old postmark, and enough years in this household to know how its paper trails worked. The return address was a residential street on the eastern edge of the city, a cottage number. No name given, just the address, and on the back of the envelope, in handwriting that was careful and deliberate, the words, "For Renly, if ever found, please see that it reaches where it belongs." Someone had tried to send this on. Someone had known where it should go, and had placed it here, and something had gone wrong, negligence, or something worse, and it had sat behind that locker for 6 years, while a family waited. I am a guardsman. My authority is the post I stand on, the tunic I wear, and the discipline I am required to keep. I have no jurisdiction over administrative rulings. I have no standing to reinstate a name on a memorial board. I have no power to settle a pensioned dispute or reprimand the office that chose to misplace this envelope. There is a right way and a wrong way to move within an institution like this, and the wrong way, the way of noise and grievance and forcing matters into daylight before the proper people have been properly reached, serves no one and changes nothing. So I did it the right way. I went to Deputy Comptroller Aldrich Fenwick, not with anger, not with accusation. I came to him as a guardsman, bringing a found article to the appropriate authority, which is precisely what I was doing. I set the envelope on his desk and told him where it had been found, and I told him the name on the front, and I told him what I had observed about the South Corridor Board. I told him all of it in a single measured presentation, without flourish. Then I stopped and waited. Fenwick was a quiet man who had occupied his role for a long time. He looked at the envelope. He looked at me. He picked it up and turned it over and read the note on the back. "For Renly, if ever found, please see that it reaches where it belongs." And he set it down, and he was still for a moment in the particular way that men are still when they are deciding something. He asked me if I knew who had written it. I said I did not. He asked me what I believed should happen to it. I said that was above my authority to determine, but that the return address on the envelope was a residential address on the eastern edge of the city, and that if the letter had a rightful recipient, that address might indicate where to begin. He looked at me for another moment. Then he said, "Leave it with me." I said, "Yes, sir." I left it with him. 3 days passed. I stood my post. The forecourt of Aldenmere in late autumn carries a particular quality of light, low and gray and even, the kind that makes the stone look older than it is, and makes the silence feel like something with weight. I stood in it, and I did not think about the envelope, because a guardsman's post does not accommodate distraction, and because I had done the only thing within my power to do. The rest was not mine to carry. On the 4th day, Fenwick came to find me. He told me that he had made inquiries through the household's residential liaison, a quiet, unofficial channel, the kind that exists for exactly this sort of delicate matter, and had identified the letter's intended recipient. He said her name was Merwin Oakes. He said she had lived at that address on the eastern edge of the city for 11 years. He said she was Renly Oakes's widow. She had waited 8 years for anything, any word, any acknowledgement, any piece of him that the household might finally release her way. The pension dispute had never been resolved. The name had simply been removed. And somewhere in the administrative gap between a dead man's record and a living woman's grief, a letter had been tucked behind a locker and left to gather cold. Fenwick asked me if I would be willing to carry the letter to her personally. I said that I would consider it an honor. The cottage was a 30-minute drive from Aldenmere. I went on a Tuesday morning, out of uniform, because this was not a ceremonial visit. It was a private one. I rang the bell and a woman opened the door who was perhaps 50, with the kind of face that has held something difficult for a long time, without letting it pull it out of shape. I told her my name and my post. I told her what had been found and where and how it had been found. I handed her the envelope. She stood in the doorway and looked at it for a long time without speaking. Then she said, "I wrote this." I waited. She said she had written it 2 years after Renly died, because she had heard from another guardsman's wife that sometimes letters placed at the duty room found their way to families, that there was an informal tradition, old and unofficial, of guardsmen holding things for one another when there was no one else to hold them. She had written to him because she had things she needed to say that the official channels had not allowed her to say. She had written to him and sent the letter to Aldenmere, addressed to his name, trusting that it would be passed on to her by someone who understood what it meant. She had never received it back. She had assumed it had been discarded with the pension papers. I told her that it had not been discarded. I told her it had been kept, after a fashion, and that it had found her now. I did not offer commentary on how it had been kept, or where, or by whose negligence. That was not why I had come. She held the envelope against her chest with both hands, the way a person holds something they had stopped expecting to touch. She looked at me and said, "Is his name on the board?" I told her it was not, at present. I told her that the matter was being reviewed by the deputy comptroller, and that I believed it would be resolved correctly. I told her I could not promise timelines, but I could tell her that the matter was in front of the right man, and that the right man had already demonstrated that he took it seriously. She nodded once. I drove back to Aldenmere and put on my tunic and stood my post. The following week, the South Corridor board was re-engraved. I was not present when it was done, and I heard no announcement. I simply walked the corridor on my regular patrol and stopped at the fourth panel and read down the third column. And 12 names from the top. There it was. Guardsman First Class Renly Oakes. His name sat in the stone exactly where it belonged, precisely as it had always been, as if it had never been removed, which is as it should be. Honor is not a thing you restore with a ceremony. You restore it by putting it back where it was supposed to be and letting it stand, quietly, without making the act of correction into something larger than the man it was always meant to serve. I finished my patrol. I came back to my post. The gray autumn light sat on the forecourt the way it always does, even and cool and utterly indifferent to the particular weight of any given day. I stood in it. There is a version of this work that people imagine when they see the tunic and the bearskin and the unmoving face. The guard who simply endures, who absorbs whatever the day sends and gives nothing back. I understand why they think that. It looks like that from the outside. But what the post actually demands is something more precise than endurance. It demands that you notice everything, that you read the gaps, that when you find something behind a locker that belongs somewhere else, you carry it there. Not because orders require it, not because anyone is watching. Because the name on the front of the envelope deserved to reach the woman who wrote it, and a man's place in the record of this household deserved to be the thing it had always been. Permanent, and true, and earned. That is all it was. A letter found, carried, and delivered, and a name returned to stone.